Perfect. Hey, my name is David. I'm a group benefits, pension, and human resource consultant with ENCOMPASS Benefits. We are your hosts today. We're super happy to have you here and welcome everyone. We want to personally welcome you for being here today, as well as all our clients watching us online or in video. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to introduce you to my team really quickly. If my team can just stand up so we can all see you. So right here we have Christy, Christine, Maddie at the back, Caroline, Kathleen, Greg, Charlie, Lorraine, and Brett. Did we miss anyone? I think that's it. Perfect. Yeah. So if you have any questions or anything, if you want more food or something like that, just let us know. We're always happy to help. Perfect. So one of the best parts about organizing these events is that we get to hear your feedback. And as always, you're going to have a small survey on your table. So if you don't mind just completing that survey at the end of the event, it really helps us to make this better and to support you in future events. So please take a moment to do that at the end of the session. Our event for today consists of two main topics: Innovation in Disability Management by OSI and Industry Trends by Manulife. Both of these groups have an incredible amount of knowledge and experience, and we're very happy to have them here today with us. I will invite Brett to introduce our special speakers, and we hope that you enjoy this session. Thank you so much.
We're real privileged to have Organizational Solutions join us today, Dr. Liz Scott, as well as Tyler, County Executive here in Western Canada. They're going to be one of our speakers today, as well as Manulife Group, the second piece. And it's interesting, my background is in the human resources end of things. I spent 8 years in the field on that. And disability management was often a regular topic that came up at tons of sessions and different conferences and that sort of thing. And for me, it's an important piece, but always was kind of a challenge, a drag, a kind of a negative piece, whereas compensation seemed to be fun and more exciting and actually give money away, right? But we have seen some technological advances in this area, not just let's change it from disability management to ability management. Okay, that's kind of, yes, let's move on from that. And I think what the OSI group brings to the table is some new concepts and new approaches to the DM piece. And I'm actually going to, can I get to your session?
It's just one continuous session.
Okay, good. In the last 2 years, we have seen an incredible increase in the challenges of disability management. Specifically, carriers are approving claims that may not be appropriate. Limited communication between the adjudicators and the employees and employer. Carriers seemingly taking a long time to approve claims. Physicians being kind of vague on their forms. This is Brett. He should be off for 2 years. He has a sore thumb. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the challenge is that the physicians are not all that specific. And then, of course, the increase in mental health claims as well. And the landscape for changing the disability, changing the management of disabilities is really challenging. And so today we want to talk a little bit about a couple of different approaches. One of them is, how can we help you manage your disabilities with the insurance carrier and with your employees? The second component is actually adding a disability management specialist company like OSI, and there's many other organizations that support on the DM side as well, as they integrate with you and with the insurance carrier. And then the third kind of component that we want to review is where they actually replace the insurance carrier and manage your short-term disability, where you would self-fund it and pay it through payroll, but they would be the adjudicator and basically give you advice to pay, should this claim be payable or not. So you would self-insure it, you'd run it through payroll, but they would manage the claim. Okay, so 3 different areas that we want to touch on. So Dr. Liz, would you come on up, please? Give her a warm welcome. She is a very studied individual with a PhD, is a professor, has written a great book on disability management as well, co-authored that, and some fuzz in the background.
No, that's this mic, I think.
Oh, is that you? Okay. I'll keep going here. Just to give you a little bit of help on our clients, how many of you have some union as part of your organization? If you can raise your hand, some union, okay? How many of you have multiple different offices across a region versus a single office? Multiple offices, okay? Multiple locations, great. How many of you have had a disability claim in the last year? Okay. How many of you would like to prevent them? That's good. Liz, come on up, and if you can pull out your slides, and if you haven't distributed them at your table, that would be great. Please follow along, take notes. We may have some times for questions throughout and during, so blessings to you.
Good, well, it's wonderful to be here in Kelowna, and absolutely love it. Had a wonderful weekend here, and gee, the sunshine is finally here. I agree with you, we're not going to announce spring just yet. So, actually, I was going to have Tyler talk to you about this slide, just to give you a quick overview of who OSI is, and then I'll get into the technical pieces. You'll notice within the presentation, I do have some research as well. They say once you have a PhD, you have to mention that in at least every presentation. So we'll try to go by that quickly. But it is important to understand what the evidence is saying about disability management, because believe it or not, there's like a lot of us DM professionals hanging around that, get together for conferences and talk about innovative things. And actually, I just had the opportunity 2 weeks ago to be in Switzerland at the university there, talking about innovation in really worldwide in disability management. So really look forward to sharing some of that with you as well. And I can tell you the number one complaint, or actually, why don't you tell me the number one complaint? What is the number one complaint about disability claims? Didn't know there was going to be a quiz this early, did you? Would have had another coffee had I told you that. Anybody share what's the most challenging piece of your disability issues? You said you had lots of disability claims.
The cost.
The cost, absolutely. Oh my goodness. The impact on the business, clearly a problem. Any other thoughts? What's the number one issue? Communication. Yeah. What is going on with that claim? What is happening? We see them out at the grocery store. Those. Anybody else? What's your number one? Oh, no one picked it. But the actual number one is how do you get people well? So how do you get them back to work? How do you get the doctors cooperating? So I'm going to pass it to Tyler. Will I fix this mic? I'm going to pass it to Tyler to...
Thank you. It might be because this one's on. I don't know. We'll turn it on. So good morning. Thanks everybody for coming today. We're looking forward to sharing the next 90 minutes or so with you. I'm Tyler McFarlane. I look after Western Canada. I work with Liz on the sales side or account management side. And I have the privilege of, introducing OSI for those of you who's never heard of OSI before. A whole bunch of you. Clearly I need to come out here a little bit more. So we're happy to celebrate 15 years this year as an organization. So some fantastic growth for us. We've got about 150 employees across the country, including Montreal, Quebec. Anybody with bilingual requirements here? Not a one. That's a first. Okay. For those of you who don't know anything about us, we are a disability management company that focuses on thank you, on short-term disability and workers' comp, WorkSafe BC solutions. And so Liz will go into more detail on that. And virtually we partner with our organizations to help get a handle on their disability management programs. So whether it's durations, whether it's cost, whether it's reporting and data, we enable you to wrap your arms around your disability management program and provide some value by way of assisting you in that process. So Liz is going to talk a little bit about what we do in between the standard adjudication process. Thanks, Greg. And she'll get into detail on that in a moment. As you can see, our team is made up of healthcare professionals, OTs, PTs, physiotherapists, whatever the case may be. And what that enables us to do is have that medically driven conversation with physicians. So when someone comes and says, as Liz suggested, I've got a hurt thumb and I'm off for 8 weeks, we challenge that process. And so it's challenged from a peer-to-peer perspective. So it helps get that disability claim into a conversation whereby we can start to leverage that experience in the industry and get these claims shortened in duration and kind of call out the people who might be necessarily taking advantage of the program. I'm sure, based on some of the meetings we had yesterday, it's pretty common practice where there's a small percentage, 3, 4, 5% of your employees who may be taking advantage of the system, who are in fact off shopping or going wakeboarding or whatever the case may be when they've hurt their leg or their knee. So I know Liz will talk a little bit about that today as well. As excited as you are to talk, hear me talk for the next hour, I'm actually going to pass it back to Liz. And
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, hopefully that gave us enough time to get the technology sorted out. I'm sure it did. And really, what we're going to talk about are one of the challenges. So let's talk about that what drives you crazy about disability claims. And then we're going to talk about innovation. So what is really going on? And I'm also going to touch on some of course, we're a third-party administrator, and we believe we can do this better than the carriers. So right up front, I'm going to admit that. So I'm going to talk to you about some of those snags, right? Some of those little snags that you see with the insurance carriers. And then we're going to talk about the OSI difference. So the next couple of slides are the ones that Brett was referring to. So that really just summarizes some of the feedback they got before the session and some of the frustrations, like what drives you crazy. So I've got 2 pages, by the way, of things that drive you crazy. So 2 pages, as Brett was saying, here we are, what's happening, how did that claim get approved, I seen him up at Big Light, my goodness, I seen a Silver Star, he couldn't possibly be disabled, what's going on? And then, of course, the other thing that really drives people crazy is that lack of communication. Oh, could you just tell me what's happening? Is it approved? Is it not approved? Like, we gotta generate payroll here. We gotta staff our facility. We gotta figure this out. And then also that length of time to collect information. Of course, we have a crisis all over Canada with physicians, and Kelowna seems to be particularly plagued with the lack of physicians right now. I don't know why. Who wouldn't want to move here? But anyway, we seem to have a little shortage right now. Oh no, the problem's not moving here. The problem is working once you get here. Right. And looking at that whole, where did this sense of entitlement come from? Disability plans are meant for those that are disabled. How did it suddenly become okay to claim disability when your kid is sick or when your parent is sick? It's not okay. There's different programs for that. We have a lot of amazing programs in Canada through the Employment Standards Act and etc. We don't need people that aren't disabled on the disability plan. Completely different thing. Also, here we go, more challenges. Those doctor's notes, off 2 weeks. What's that mean, really? And multiple illnesses, complications, and with our demographic, of course, when someone goes off with a broken hip and needs a hip replacement or even just needs to be casted for a while, if they happen to be overweight, if they happen to have diabetes, if they happen to be over 60, yeah, there's going to be more complications. So that's prolonging claims. And we see that in the data, right? We see that when young people go off, the durations are shorter. When older people go off, more mature people go off, we see longer durations. Less claims, but longer durations. So why? Of course, aging just takes you longer to heal when you break something. And, oh, my all-time favorite, mental health claims. So I am going to talk to you about some of the strategies on mental health claims, because I can say
that we're pretty close to having that figured out. Now, I can also say is unfortunately there's a new one emerging, and how many have had concussion claims? Not yet. Oh, yeah. Aren't those evil? Oh, those are our new mystery. Now that we finally figure out how to manage mental health claims, someone had to come up with a concussion diagnosis. And the same issue exists, right? With mental health claims, concussion claims, one of the symptoms is I'm fatigued, I'm tired. Oh man, I think I hit my head. Is that something all of us can probably say this morning, especially the person I got before mine? So you look at that and say, you know, how do we demystify this? How do we find some solutions in all of this? So I'm going to talk to you about some of the mental health solutions. And then stress claims. So first let me state, stress is not a diagnosis. Stress is in fact a fact of life. So where is it that anyone should be approved for a stress claim? The answer to that is no. If you do not have a diagnosis under the DSM-5, you should not be approved on disability. I'm not saying that people don't have issues. I think, you know, hey, I grew up with 2 brothers. I could probably be in therapy for the rest of my life. But, you know, but that doesn't mean I'm disabled, right? I have a friend that's a psychiatrist, and he's hilarious. He says, you know, all the data, 1 in 5 Canadians will suffer from depression in their lifetime. You know, whatever the last data that came out of Fraser Institute, 60% of Canadians experience high levels of stress. And when I speak to him, he goes, really, those numbers are all wrong. In fact, 100% of people should be in therapy. Like, okay. But in some way it's true, right? And again, the issue with mental health claims is it's just a collection of symptoms. That's how doctors diagnose that. It's a collection of symptoms. So there's no lab, there's no MRI, there's no blood test that says you have anxiety or depression. It's just a collection of symptoms. So consequently, what we see is, number 1, it's easy to misdiagnose. Number 2, if you are misdiagnosed, you get on the wrong medication and in the wrong treatment. So really, really delicate to make sure an individual that has a true mental health problem gets diagnosed correctly. And we see a lot of this. We work with firefighters and police officers, and there's a fine line between PTSD and depression. But I'll tell you, if they get diagnosed incorrectly, they can be in the wrong treatment for months and not getting well. So that's one of the keys to this, right? In mental health, getting the right diagnosis. And then onto the right medication. So I'm going to talk a lot about that whole piece of on the right medication, because many of you know, probably I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure all of you internally can answer this question, that you know someone that has had depression. And you probably also know the dance they do with their drugs. So difficult to find the right cocktail. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk to you about pharmacogenetics and how that works positively in claims management for mental health cases. So just to talk a little bit about why we're unique and how we're different and why I'm here today, and you know why I believe in this. And I do believe that really disability management is about working with the individual to help them recover and get well. That's what it's all about. That's what disability management is. It's really working with that individual that's claimed a disability to get them well. Where's the action plan? Where's the action plan? So what it's not about getting another piece of paper that proves you're disabled, right? And 2 weeks later, someone comes to you for another piece of paper that proves you're disabled. and 2 weeks later, someone comes to you for another piece of paper that proves you're disabled, what do you start to believe? That you're disabled. Of course. So you have to turn that around and say, how is true disability management done? And how true disability management is done is to ask about capabilities, to ask what you can do. I can't lift 50 pounds. Does that matter in my job? Well, some of my suitcases, but you know. But other than that, I don't need to lift 50 pounds. So it is all about the ability. And as we think about mental health, the worst thing for someone ever. So you play this forward. You have someone that is depressed. You have someone that is upset, and you tell them to sit at home for 4 weeks. To what? Think about it? Oh my God. I think the only thing that keeps me sane some days is going into work. You can't sit at home and think about your problems. You are not going to get well. You're not going to get well. So when we think about mental health, appropriate diagnosis, right medication, and return to work. This is the way that should be done. Not, oh, let's get another piece of paper that proves you're disabled. So it's just turning that whole thing around and saying, you know, what can we do? What are some of the strategies to help that individual recover? What are some of the strategies? And that's one of the most missed elements in disability management is where's the action plan? Show me the action plan. And by the way, if what's happening, if what we have now isn't working, let's find something else. Right? Like if we're in physiotherapy for sciatica, and 6 weeks later we still have sciatica, what does it tell you about the therapy? Yeah, that was not working. That's not working, right? So where's the action plan? Let's figure this out. So we push the doctor or push the physiotherapist or push the psychologist to say, yeah, what you're doing, what we're doing here, that's not working. Let's figure it out. So we become the conscience. We become the conscience on their shoulder. Saying, and our folks are regulated healthcare professionals, so we're nurses, foreign trained physicians that didn't want to go back and do their residency, OTs, PTs, kinesiologists, osteopaths, you name it, we're calling. So from a case management perspective, it's sort of a colleague talking to a colleague about what's next. This isn't working. What's next? Let's figure this out. Help them figure it out. Because really, I mean, how many people think that people want to be disabled for long periods? Yeah, well, I know there's a couple. That 4%. Yeah, we're going to talk about that 4% too. Yeah. Of course. But the vast majority of the people want to work and want to get well. So we really believe that this model does absolutely reduce disability costs, because you can imagine you shorten the duration. As you shorten that duration, of course you reduce the cost. That's where all your money is in disability. The longer the claim, the longer you pay the person to be off, the more expensive it is. So let's squish that, reduce the duration of the file. And again, making sure we have that care management approach. The extension of the employment relationship, right? You don't get to go off and forget you have a job. And that little 4% that wants to be off, what we say is, you know, they can play the game, but we're going to play it a little better than they do. Because you've got to have the evidence. You've got to be committed to an action plan. You've got to be on the right medication. You've got to be in treatment. And always focusing on that ability. So, as Brett touched on, I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways to do this. First, I'm going to get through a little bit more of the science or the history or the, innovations, and then I'm going to come back to this. So, of course, there's 4 different ways to do this. One is an advice to pay program, so you're self-insured, and OSI would take care of all of your files, all of your claims. The second one is sort of an early intervention program where we get involved. There's still an insurer underwriting or paying, but we get involved up front to say, we've got about a 15-day window to really make a difference, make sure the person has a diagnosis and appropriate treatment and care. And then the third way is ad hoc. So if you're doing this internally, or if you just have that 1 or 2 claims, or you're saying, oh, if only we could resolve this, or if only we could help that person, then those are the ones we can also get involved in. And then also, if you do have an internal model, we're able to come in and do some training, do an assessment of your internal program, and then do some training with your staff on appropriate disability management techniques. So now to the innovations. So let's talk about these innovations. So we'll talk first about this advice to pay. So pretend OSI is doing it all. And number 1 is immediately ruling out those that should not be on disability. If it's a workplace issue, I get in trouble for saying this, but hating your boss is not a disability. CLS, crappy life syndrome, is not a disability, right? So really, right at the very beginning though, we need to make that distinction. Is it a disability? If it's not a disability, you should not be going on disability insurance. You should not be going on a disability claim. So really putting in place that process of if it is workplace issues, let's have that conversation, because that's not going to go away. If you had an altercation with your supervisor just before you left the workplace, how anxious are you going to be to come back? No. And I guarantee you, the longer that goes on, the higher the chances that that individual will find a psychiatrist to sign a piece of paper with a diagnosis, treatment, and a drug. So those right away, let's deal with them. Let's have a mediated conversation in the workplace. Of course the individual can access the EAP, get into some counseling, learn some resilience, learn how to communicate with their supervisor. Like the way you're talking to me right now is not going to motivate me. Could we talk about methods that may motivate me if you want me to work a little differently? Right? Easy. But it's not a disability. So I can tell you the most difficult cases to get back are the cases that when we talk to them, they say, I never want to see their face again. Those are the tough ones. So right away you make that call. Is it a disability? And clearly other things, but it's not disability. So stop trying to force them to go to the doctor to get a form that says they're disabled. Because the next time they do that, and the next time they do that, they suddenly believe, oh my God, I have an adjustment disorder. I'm disabled. So really, right at the very beginning, getting that straight. That very first thing. And then with case management, I'm going to take you through this in a little bit more detail for case management, but there are complicated files, and there's non-complicated files. And there's a guy that broke his leg and he's got a cast and he comes back. No blood clot, we're all good, right? And then there's the complicated files. Probably people that have been misdiagnosed for years, may or may not have ever gotten someone to give them appropriate diagnosis. Maybe a GI thing, maybe Crohn's, colitis, IBS, something like that, that's never resolved. And those are the ones, though, I mean, we regard those as a great mystery. Let's solve it. Let's figure it out. What's really going on there? How do we stop that recurrence? And then looking at barriers. So what are the barriers to an early return to work? Could be something, could be nothing, could be the supervisor, could be they were never suited for the job in the first place. We had this case, the person was an accounting clerk, and she had a new boss, and the boss was putting pressure on her for quality. So about 40% of the invoices that went out were wrong, incorrect, not good for the company, obviously. 40% of your invoices are wrong. And so her new boss started to say to her, you know, like, I can't redo your work. Like, you've got to deliver here. We've got to fix this. So she went off. Of course. Anxiety. Of course. And she may have had an underlying anxiety condition. However, when we got the medical, who knows what was happening here? Any ideas? What do you think we found in the medical? Dyslexic. She was dyslexic. What the heck was she doing in that job in the first place? She was dyslexic! For goodness sake! What are you doing as an accounting clerk? Right? So sometimes we find that. Now, we went back to the employer and said, oh, you know, we would suggest that she move to another department, right? And they're thinking, oh, well, there's an altercation between the supervisor. We're like, no, really has nothing to do with that. It really has to do with competencies and capabilities, and yeah. So she moved to a different department, and she was wonderful at her new role. And some of it is digging, right? It's digging, getting to that answer, figuring this out. What's going on? What was that barrier? Well, the barrier was she never should have been in that job in the first place. That was the barrier. Also, looking at it from the perspective of using IMEs correctly. Unfortunately, independent medicals have been used and abused for certifying disability. We should never put the onus on the physician to certify a disability. That is not their job. Their job is to diagnose and treat. That's their job. Their job is not to certify disability. So, for instance, what does your company do for a living? You care for people. What about you guys? What does your company do for a living? Software. Okay. Do you believe that any of the physicians in this community could code or understand coding? Probably very few. Exactly. Right. So how are they going to tell you that the individual that just went off with anxiety could or couldn't code? They can't. That's up for us. That's to us. That's for you. What the physician should be doing is telling us capabilities, limitations, and treating the individual based on the diagnosis. So we need to stop using IMEs to certify disability. What we should be using IMEs for is give us the action plan. What's the next steps in this case? What's precluding this individual from getting well? That's what physicians are for, to diagnose and treat. So let's use that tool appropriately. Give us an action plan. Give us next steps. Not tell us if the person's disabled or not. The physician knows nothing about coding. And then, of course, tracking and measuring results. So we always want to look at what's working, what's not working, and also taking a quick look at your policy. Is it working? So let's go through these a little bit step by step. So claim initiation. So, as we said, a solid process focused on the positive. First call, we make a call within 24 hours of being notified of the disability. The very first call we make to that individual, we ask them about return to work. Because we know from the research, actually I'll put that question out. So, from the perspective of return to work, what's the single most important thing for someone to return to work? What's the single most important element in someone returning to work? What do we think? Oh, sorry?
Shortest time. Shortest time off.
Oh, amount of time off. I like that one. That's a good one.
I think long
Yeah, there it is. There it is. If they want to come back, they do. Doesn't matter who the doctor is, doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, doesn't matter what their treatment is. If the day they leave the workplace, they want to come back, they do. Yeah, that's called, if you want to use the technical term, it's called self-efficacy. And there's tons of studies on this, but at the end of the day, self-efficacy is what matters in return to work. The other thing that's really important is what are the claimant's expectations? We all know it has to do with expectations, right? What are the expectations? Managing those expectations. So if we can find that out in the very first call, that gives us a lot of insight on how to best manage that claim. And what we also know is let's not do this. Let's not medicalize personal issues. Let's not do this. Yes, it is quite tragic that you just had a divorce from your husband of 6 years. Is that a disability? No. Might even be freedom for that matter. You know, it's not. So let's not call it that. Right? Maybe you need a couple of weeks off to get your stuff out of the house or whatever. But it's not a disability. So let's call it what it is, and let's not diagnose or, over-diagnose personal issues. Because if you go, a physician says you have adjustment disorder. You go back in 2 weeks, and the physician says you still have adjustment disorder. You go back in 2 weeks, you have adjustment disorder. What do you start believing? Right. Now suddenly, you have a label. I have adjustment disorder. Right? So really, let's not start down that path. Let's not go down that path. And that's part of, that first step in claim initiation. Oh, here it is. I told you I had to show you research. Right. So I'm not going to take you through this, but feel free to go and look at it at your own leisure. If you do want any of these references, so if you look at it and say, oh, that's a really interesting article that was published by Hoffman or whatever, then please feel free to contact me for that. But essentially all this research is saying the same thing. You can see it's very recent research. It's 2014, 2015, 16, some of the older stuff too. But it's all essentially saying what I just said, is let's not over-medicalize stuff. Right at the very beginning, let's get this on track. And make sure at the very beginning that we get the diagnosis correct. And I'll use another case, and for those of you that have seen me speak before, you may already know the answer to this one too. We got a case, it was an ad hoc case. Someone contacted us, high-functioning consultant, had been diagnosed with depression, and had been off for 3 months, still was not getting well. Wasn't getting well. The employer called us and said, listen, we know he's a high-functioning consultant, he really doesn't want to be off work, we don't know what's going on, can you help us with this case? First thing we do, of course, is phone the individual, pick up the phone. Oh, tell us what was happening, when you first noticed the symptoms. And he said, oh, nothing unusual. I had just been camping with the family in upstate New York. Got home, started to feel these symptoms. Anybody know where this is going?
Lyme disease.
Yeah, Lyme disease. Had nothing to do with depression. So that antidepressant that he had been prescribed, useless. So you really have to, again, right at the beginning of these things, understand, take a history, figure it out. Just because the doctor puts a diagnosis on the form, if the person's not getting well, either it's the wrong diagnosis or the wrong treatment. And unfortunately, that's how people get to LTD. So, as I was saying, the case management piece, that focus. So really looking at it from the perspective of how do we fix this? how do we make sure that they're in appropriate treatment and care, and that in fact they're really having regular contact. If I phone someone and they tell me, or if our case managers phone and they say my next doctor's appointment is in 4 weeks, that is not active and appropriate treatment. 4 weeks to what? Notice that what you prescribed isn't working? So really that constant contact. So some of the innovations, very exciting. As I said, the mental health thing we almost haven't figured out. And here's some of the things. So number one is, of course, everyone knows what cognitive behavioral therapy is. Yeah, everyone knows that's the leading treatment for depression. Yeah, everyone knows if the person has anxiety, they shouldn't be in CBT, they should be in a different treatment. Okay. Anyway, what we should be looking at is during that cognitive behavioral therapy is a return to work focus. So, of course, as mentioned earlier, anybody, everybody could be in therapy for the rest of their lives, right? We've got like 40 years of baggage here, right? So, while we're solving your whole life, what isn't happening? Return to work. So the very first part of the CBT treatment should be focused on establishing the coping skills and the resilience for return to work. We use this approach all across Canada, and we started it, of course we don't do anything without doing trials first. We trialed it in a manufacturing environment of 450 employees, and we said, okay, we're setting this up. We trained all the psychologists in that community on return to work based cognitive behavioral therapy. We brought in experts. I didn't do that, but we brought in the experts to train them. I can tell you it has made such a huge difference. So we have a white paper on that Tyler can send to you, but we reduced the durations by almost 60%. 60%. The better news is, so it's small community, only 450 employees. Not only that, but the positive impact that had on that community, the claiming rates, the frequency, the number of cases has gone down by almost 50%. So then, after we weed out the people that were just in the wrong treatment, let's talk about drugs. Medication. Legit drugs. Yeah, the whole marijuana thing, that's another session. Today we're talking about legit medication. Excuse me. So, when you think about it, who's heard about pharmacogenetics? Good, a couple of people, perfect. So pharmacogenetics, what it is, it's a little test, you spit in this vial, you send it away, and you get back your list of what medications you metabolize. So what medications work for you and what medications don't work for you. So the key, and it's based on your DNA. So you do this little DNA test, only medication related. Your physician gets a URL link, you get a URL link, and it tells you which medications are good for you. As I mentioned earlier, we never support anything without doing it ourselves or doing a trial. So we have OSI, all of our staff can do this, and even though they probably shouldn't have, I've heard a lot from my staff saying it's been incredible. Because if you're red lit for a medication, it means that you will, or you're currently having an adverse reaction to that drug. If you're yellow, you need to change the dosage, and if you're green, you can metabolize that medication. It is really, we've used this on difficult psychological cases, and it makes a huge difference to be on the right medication. Most people do the dance, right? You do the dance with medication. Oh, the green one didn't work, let's try the red one. Oh, the red one didn't work, let's try the blue one. You know, it's just a dance other than that. It's a very scientific method of determining which medication you metabolize. And it's interesting, some medications, for instance, Plavix, those of you that know Plavix, you probably know what Plavix is. Plavix is a blood thinner for usually people with cardiac issues and sometimes other issues, but usually cardiac issues. Plavix, if you have any Polynesian descent, you take that medication, you will die. Because of that genetic code, they cannot metabolize that medication. That drug now comes with a warning label, by the way. But what about the medications that it's not that severe? What about the medications like the antidepressants that you're on the wrong one? The problem with antidepressants, if you get on the wrong one, your condition's going to get worse. Think about this. Now you've got a buildup of Prozac or whatever it is, a buildup. You think that's good? No. That's going to result in adverse effects, adverse reactions. Now the person's suicidal instead of getting well. So pharmacogenetics, amazing results. And of course, workplace involvement. The other thing we know from the research is the more involved the workplace is, the better. Like someone's a high performer while they're with you, and then suddenly their boss never calls them? Yeah, where's their motivation to come back? I haven't heard from anyone in the workplace. They don't even care that I'm off work. Because all of us know we're scurrying around trying to cover their job, you know, but they don't know that. They're disabled. They're thinking, they don't need me, I'm not going back. I take another 4 weeks on disability, they don't need me anyway. No one's ever called me. So what we know is that workplace connection is so important, so important. Any questions, comments, really difficult claims you want to throw at me? Not yet. Yes?
What do you do in a case of someone who's been told they have to wait 6 or 8 months to get in to see a dermatologist, and their diagnosis or their treatment or whatever is depending on that diagnosis, on that subset?
So the question was, what about people that are on the waiting list for a specialist, in this case a rheumatologist? So the answer to that is twofold. Number one is, can they be doing modified duty while they're waiting for that specialist appointment? So do they really need to be off work? But number two, and most importantly, if they are off work, let's get them on the waiting list. They're at home anyway. Someone's going to miss an appointment. So, and you see how it works with doctor's offices though. You go into your doctor, you need a specialist, your doctor gives that to their nurse or the admin, says, oh, schedule an appointment for Liz with the whatever, eye doctor. Right, okay. So that sits on her desk for about 2 weeks. Finally, she phones. They say, oh yeah, we have an appointment in October. How's October? I say, yeah, well, okay. Yeah, okay. I'll send you a letter saying your appointment's in October. Did anywhere in that process, did anyone ask if there was an earlier appointment? No. So sometimes that's how that happens, right? So the first thing we do is we get on the phone with the specialist office and say, hey, cancellations, earlier appointments, any possibilities? And then the other thing, and the last one, and I didn't mention this as one of the two, but it is an option that's available, is really, what about out of system? I got to think about it. My husband had a meniscus tear, and he did not want to lose the golf season. So what did he do? He paid $2,500 to have his meniscus repaired. That was it. And that's available in BC. So if you want to go down to Falls Creek, you want to go down to Canby, hey, people make those decisions, right? $2,500, maybe I'm not going to go to Mexico this year. Didn't want to go there anyway, right? So that's a possibility. So depending on the individual, we get them an earlier appointment out of system. The individual, not the company, but the individual makes those decisions. So it's just, again, like a matter of figuring out that puzzle. What's the barrier? How do we work around that barrier? Other questions before I go on? Thoughts? Ponderings?
If someone is scheduled to be off, say, for 3 months, and you said the employer doesn't call, at what point should you? Because I think on the employer's side, they're concerned that they might be harassing them. If they've got a letter saying they're going to be off 3 months, why would you be calling to say when you're coming back? And I think there's that fine line that you feel you shouldn't be.
Yes, and you know how to deal with that fine line? And yeah. So first of all, I would say 98% of the people are happy that you call, and there's lots of research around them. I can show you the references for that. But, however, there is that, what are you bugging me for? You know, my doctor let me be off for 6 months. What are you bugging me for? So what you do is, as they're going off, that very first phone call, you say to them, oh, we'd love to stay in touch while you're off and recovering. When would be a convenient time to call? So you just transferred the power to them, instead of you having the power to pick up the phone and, you know, check to make sure they really are sick. Right? Now you've said to them, you know, we'd love to follow up and see how you're doing, stay in touch, let you know what's going on at work, invite you to the Christmas party, you know, the baby showers. When would be a convenient time to call? Now they have the power. And then when you're on the call, you say the same thing. So, oh wow, it was so great catching up, and so glad you're doing well, and we're so glad you're recovering. Would it be okay if we called back? When's a convenient time? So you've given them that power. So that's how we do it. That's how we encourage supervisors to do it. And if we're doing supervisor training, that's what we train. Give them the power.
I think the key is the intent of the phone call is not to ask, can you come back to work tomorrow? But it's an update of how the progress is going. And that's a very different angle than, you know, if you know you're going to be off for 3 months, you already know that, right? So after a month, you can't say, can you come back to work tomorrow? The intent is really the patient care. And hey, how's our medical system supporting you? I think is the other piece. Are the doctors able to get you what you need, right? I think you were talking about that earlier.
Mm-hmm. 100%, yeah. And I know I'm just doing a time check. I know that. What about 15 more minutes or so? Okay, perfect. So, and just know that we have a lot of research again that supports this whole piece on let's look at the factors that enhance return to work. Yes.
I was just going to say, have you ever had the situation where you do phone them and then the spouse intervenes and says, I'm sorry, but so-and-so is unable to come to the phone? They're that unwell.
Yeah, and really, I mean, if we phone and get that response, usually our response is, oh, that's so unfortunate. When would be a convenient time to call back? Because under the parameters of the employer's plan, we do need to chat with him. So really, again, sort of set that appointment. Yeah, he may be throwing up now, but he's not going to be throwing up tomorrow. So just trying to set that.
If it's mental health.
Yeah.
Like he's on the edge or she's on the edge and she's going to jump.
That,
you know?
Well, then we call 911. But really, in those circumstances, we do say to the spouse, you know, we can't talk to you about the individual's medical condition, but we are a care management firm, and it is really important that we speak to the individual. So then we phone back when she's not home.
If they pick up.
Yeah, if they pick up, I know. But it's an obligation to speak to us, right? I mean, you have to provide sufficient objective medical evidence to support your disability. So, and if there is something like that going on, though, most importantly is we need to get the person into appropriate treatment. And sometimes family is not assisting in the facilitation of that individual getting well. So again, barriers, figuring out the barriers, trying to figure out how to break down those barriers. Like you got to get that person in appropriate care. Like being in the fetal position, sucking your thumb in the basement is not okay, right? So who doesn't want them to get well? And if that's the spouse, then they might have bigger problems than just the disability. But yeah, it's trying to figure that out. And sometimes we go directly to the doctor and say, we've noticed this. There seems to be some issues at home. Wanted you to be aware of that. So really, again, just sort of problem solving what's going on there. But we'll reach out to the physician if the person's not recovering. So just more information about return to work programs, looking at capabilities, of course, and manager involvement in the return to work discussion as well. And that's part of good return to work. And I love case scenarios, but we had one individual returning from generalized anxiety disorder on the right medication, in the right treatment, facilitating the return to work, worked in a really noisy cubicle area. So what we did is we spoke to the manager, spoke to the plant, or the company, and for all the workstations, we put up little stoplights and Velcro stoplights. And if it was red, don't disturb me, I need to concentrate. If it was yellow, proceed with caution. And if it was green, yeah, everyone's having a good day. So we didn't do it just for the individual returning, we did it for the whole work area. It was amazing, because that person's limitation was, they're coming back from a generalized anxiety disorder. Those of you that know people with anxiety know that it's like like it's that, you just, right? Like, oh, someone's coming close to me. And you get that kind of, like, you can't, even though it's not a heart attack, but it feels like a heart attack, right? You're just like, oh. So we got to remove that as a barrier. And the stoplight thing worked. We had another person, they were returning to work from depression. Those of you that have known people with depression know that concentration is one of the elements in depression. So, of course, people with undiagnosed and untreated depression, we can talk about that too. And certainly, I always describe depression, for those of you that haven't experienced it, it's like being in a big black hole that you just can't get out of. Imagine depression. So the medication, the treatment, now they're up out of the hole, but there's still a lot of residual, lack of concentration is the biggest limitation when you're coming back from a depression claim. So what we did for this individual, they were coming back into a call center environment, and what we did is we got them, and they're on the wrong drugs or they're in the wrong treatment, and that's got to be fixed first. But when they're coming back to work, how do we create transitional return to work for mental health conditions? Let's look what the limitation is. Concentration, definitely, that with anxiety, yeah. How many of you have returned people to work from mental health diagnoses? Anybody else got a good example? Yep.
Good example? What?
Oh, maybe not a good example.
Well, basically what we do at our company is that we make sure that we ask at least once a week, how's it going? Do you have a buddy that you can speak to? Because we find that our guys tend to isolate. So they have home, then they have work, then they have everything in between. So we try and say, well, instead of going straight home, why don't you and the guy that you work closest with go out for a beer after?
Yeah.
Bring us the bill, we'll pay for it. So we do ask
Very nice.
very often, how's it going, anything else we can help with, is there anybody that we can put you in touch with, that kind of thing. So we do tend to have them do a little bit better when they come back. But there are some difficult ones where it's a lot of people we can't do anything as an employer. And we try to keep them in touch with somebody who can help them and continue to help them.
And actually, that's a very good point, both points. But number one, how many of you have heard of the NAV Canada Peer Support Solutions? So NAV Canada has published this, And what they do, it's called a peer support network. So they actually went out to their workforce and said, hey, who wants to be a peer support for those with mental health? And they had a great response. All those people got training in mental health first aid. And now that's how it works. So HR is hardly involved. It is this group, this peer support network, do exactly that. Coffee. Yeah, let's go for coffee. And I have a friend, she's an older Italian lady, and I used to work with her in my first job at Weston Foods, and we stayed in touch over the years, and she goes, the real solution to this is to bring back the coffee hour. And it's so true. She said, when they used to leave work, they used to all go have coffee. Complain about their day, complain about their husbands, whatever, But it was very therapeutic. So let's bring that back, right? I have another talk that I do. It's called Bring Back the Water Cooler. And it is absolutely that. What happened to the water cooler? It got replaced by the text. So that conversation, and also the PTSD research is very clear. So what works in treatment of PTSD is immediately discussing it with colleagues. So have a coffee. Have a coffee. Can you imagine all the treatment, all the medication, all the everything? What really works is just having coffee? I'm in. But for return to work, that's a really good strategy. Yeah. And then the other one is, those very difficult cases is, again, getting to the bottom of it. Getting to the bottom of it. How do we make sure that people get into appropriate treatment and care to get well? Yeah. Lots of walking wounded, right? And that's so important to figure that out. So I wanted to come back to this just briefly and talk about the ways that we can help. So number one approach is where the traditional insurer stays involved, and they certainly pay, issue the checks, and we get involved at the beginning. So the insurers generally wait for all three pieces of paper to arrive. So they'll wait for the employer statement, the employee statement, and the APS. That generally takes about 15 days. And then their commitment is to reach out to the individual within 7 days of that paperwork arriving. So for us, we say, well, let us get involved in that first period of time. Because what do we know? What do we know from the research? Oh, who was listening? What do we know? Yes, absolutely. So the earlier the contact, the better, right? The sooner you start talking to people about return to work, the better. Absolutely. So that's one of the ways to do this, and then we would stay involved sort of in the medical management or the care management approach, and then the return to work facilitation. The third one is the consultation on specific files. So these are sort of the complicated or complex files, like the example I gave about Lyme disease. We get called in because there just aren't solutions and we don't know what's happening. So in those cases, we really help find the solutions. And it's better than having someone go to LTD. So the goal is obviously to move forward the recovery of the individual. And then I do not have as much time, but I thought perhaps we could spend just a half a second talking about the leading cause. And this really just, again, talks about why mental health cases are so challenging. So I'm going to skip by that. I will say that this clearly has a strong return on investment. So if we can take care of the individual and reduce the duration, that's just money back to your bottom line. That's it. It's easy. Not easy, but it certainly the results are clear. The return on investment is high when we implement a strong disability management or recovery-focused program. And again, it's healthy employees and extension of that employment relationship. So creating that as an experience, a positive experience. When the individual is off, we're helping them recover and helping them return to work. So you can also look at this at your leisure, but it really talks about, you know, the blue boxes are sort of, okay, here's what happened, this claim started, adjudication, case management, but it's really, the trick is, or the real way to have a difference here is all those sidebars, right? So that was the hallway conversations that make the difference. It's really making sure that that case is managed and that the individual is focused on getting well. And my final slide, I always believe something wonderful is about to happen.